Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into Baxy's Musical Podcast. You happen to have tuned into a real doozy. And if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, share it with everyone you know. Even complete strangers like new stuff from time to time, and they like stories of redemption, like the one you'll hear today. And if you can leave a big fat review, that would be fantastic. Also, make sure you check out Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates on what's coming up in future episodes. Today's episode is brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram of Chicopee. Visit Metro's state-of-the-art dealership right next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today. Okay, so here it is, my long overdue interview with Jack Hues from Wang Chung on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
So, true story. I have only been kicked out of one concert during my entire life. And to be fair, it wasn't my fault. I was unfairly targeted during a chance encounter with a different major recording artist who chose to rat me out rather than take responsibility for their own actions. The band that night was Wang Chung, and today I will finally be able to explain what happened that night 37 years ago and offer my sincerest apologies to Wang Chung's lead guitarist and vocalist, Jack Hues, for any misunderstanding that my forcible ejection may have provoked, because it wasn't me, it was somebody else, and that somebody else were the Beastie Boys. Oh, it's a hell of a story, and you'll hear it during the interview. But before we get into any of that, let me just explain a little bit about Wang Chung. From 1980 to 1990, Jack Hues and Nick Feldman released 5 albums under the name Wang Chung. In 1982, Wang Chung, spelt with an H, released their first album on Arista Records. Sadly, that record failed to chart, but the following year, they became only the second British band behind Asia to sign with Geffen Records. At the insistence of David Geffen, the band updated the spelling of their name to become Wang Chung with a W, and then released their second album, Points on a Curve. They would then release 4 singles off that album, which included their 1984 hit Dance Hall Days, which topped out at number 1 on the U.S. dance charts. In 1985, they recorded the entire soundtrack to the William Friedkin film To Live and Die in L.A. Again, they scored another minor hit with the title track from that soundtrack. They also provided the song Fire in the Twilight for the soundtrack for the blockbuster John Hughes film, The Breakfast Club, in 1985. In 1986, Wang Chung released their 4th album, Mosaic, which included the biggest hit of their career, Everybody Have Fun Tonight. The song was a huge hit in the United States, reaching number 2 on the Billboard charts and prompting the album to go gold. In 1990, Hues and Feldman went their separate ways. Feldman formed the band Promised Land with John Moss of Culture Club and would then go on to a successful record executive career, serving as the head of A&R for Warner Brothers Europe. Hues, however, would continue working on film soundtracks, including The Guardian in 1990 and An Active Memory in 2011. Since then, Wang Chung have reformed a number of times and are about to hit the road next month on the Abducted by the 80s tour, which includes The Motels, Naked Eyes, and Men Without Hats. That tour is going to be coming through Hampton Beach in New Hampshire on June 16th, their only stop in New England. So when I had a chance to officially explain myself and offer an apology of sorts to Jack Hues of Wang Chung, I leaped at the chance to finally set the record straight. This is my interview with Jack Hues from Wang Chung on Baxy's Musical Podcast. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very good. Good to talk to you. The Abducted by the 80s tour with the Motels, Naked Eyes, Animotion, and Men Without Hats. It sounds so ridiculously fun. I mean, it makes me want to squeeze into a pair of parachute pants and regrow my rat's tail. Tell me about this tour. I think it sounds so much fun.
That's exactly what it's designed to do. Yeah. No, we've been doing various kind of 80s tours, with packages of bands, and I think in general terms, we were enjoyable, though a lot of it has been, we've sort of missed being able to play longer sets. So we decided to sort of chat to some friends of ours, particularly, all the bands you've listed, and see if they were into the same thing, and they were all up for it. There was an agency that loved the idea of the title, Abducted by the 80s, and put the feelers out, and a bunch of people came back and said, "Yeah, we'll put this on. We think we can sell this," you know. So, but it's essentially about, playing the hits. I mean, I say playing the old hits. It's playing the hits, but in an updated kind of way, because I think Wang Chung is a much more rock kind of band than it seemed to be in the 80s, and also trying to do a bit of the deeper catalogue, so certainly playing To Live and Die in LA, and maybe getting around to Space Junk, or those sort of songs, So I would hope we'd be doing like a 30, 40-minute set, something like that. And
So, Abducted by the 80s is a song that you recorded back like 22 years ago on the Taser Up album. And
yeah,
the song it's hilarious in a way because it touches on a lot of the aspects of that
yeah, yeah.
entire decade. When you look back at the 80s now, I mean, do you look at it fondly, or do you occasionally find yourself cringing like most people who lived through the 80s?
I do find myself not exactly cringing, but slightly incredulous. That people are so into it. And but on the other hand, I get, the music in the 80s has this, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it has this very kind of positive feel, and compared with the general horizon that most people look at these days, even in music, it's grim, basically. So the 80s is a sort of escapism, and also I think, it was a time of great songwriting. The songwriters were good craftsmen. We were all coming off the back of the Beatles and the prog bands, and also the in the UK, the whole punk thing, sharpened everybody up, really. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so there was a real taste for songwriting craft, and I think that's one of the things that made the songs particularly good in the 80s.
Well, so the 80s were high school and college for me. So I mean, I that's kind
Uh,
of like a big sweet spot of mine. To play
yeah,
those songs again, like 40 years later,
yeah.
these songs mean things to people. I mean, people, they're a lot. This is the soundtrack of their lives in a very real way.
Yeah.
What must it feel like to see those songs resonate with people even after all of these years?
Well, that's part of the reason why Nick and I are doing it. I think, you can't put a value on the connection that you get from people, when they hear Dance All Days and see it live, and the kind of visceral energy of that song, and being in the room with them, it's a very powerful experience,
Yeah.
And a lot of people come up and talk about, when they first heard it, and, what it did for them, basically,
So I saw Wang Chung in concert in 1987, and
Cool.
it is the only concert that I've ever been kicked out of.
What were you doing?
Well, there's a story behind it. I swear to God, it's not my fault. It was March in 1987, and you guys were playing at the Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, and we had tickets up in the balcony, and these three guys come up and sit in the row in front of us, and they got these big giant cups of soda. But
Right.
three or four songs into it, these guys start to put their hands in the cup and start throwing ice on the stage, and they're they're doing it like repeatedly over and over again. I think at one point Nick gets hit by an ice cube and he starts pointing to the balcony. Well, of course, security comes in, and they go right up to these guys and they say, it's these guys behind us. And so we got kicked out without ever seeing the end of the show. But here's the capper of it, Jack. This is the great part. Those three guys were the Beastie Boys who were in Milwaukee the night before. So, so the
There's
Beastie
something
Boys,
familiar about that story, actually.
I
Yeah.
the Beastie
I
Boys
think we
got me
were
kicked out of a Wang Chung show.
fair enough.
So I wanted to set the record straight that it was not me throwing
Right.
ice cubes at you, and I hope
Okay.
and I want to apologize for any inconvenience that it might have caused the show.
No, I remember because we did the 80s cruise earlier on this year, like a month or so ago, and the Beastie Boys were on that for a while, and they were great. But I wish I'd known that story. I could have gone
So
overboard. Yeah.
I want to talk about something from last summer. You released a solo single since
Hmm.
2017. And I was just listening to it the other day. I think first of all, I think it's an incredible song. I mean, it's a really beautiful song. Kind of have a little bit of like an Elliott Smith vibe to it. But the
Mhm.
song, interestingly enough, is about UFOs, and the timing of it is actually really interesting because now there's just so much more information and admission from just the last year confirming that these
Mm.
things were not only real, but that we've known about it for years. I know this is a
Yeah.
subject that you're very, very interested in. Tell me a little
Mm.
bit about where that interest comes from you, and about that song.
I guess initially it was when I moved out of London. I moved effectively where I live now in Canterbury, and I met some people who were interested in these kind of what were then considered alternative subjects, which I knew nothing about. And I remember spending an evening in a pub talking to this guy. I think he was talking to me about the Philadelphia experiment, which I won't go into. But I was like, wow, there's all this information and documented stuff, and yet you never hear it spoken about, And that, started reading the books, and then you get to the UFO subject. And that in particular is a subject that's incredibly well documented, actually, the central kind of stuff that happened, and yet it's still a subject that's laughed at
Hmm.
in, the public realm, if you know what I mean. If you start trying to talk about it to friends at a party, they're thinking like, "Oh God," So, but as you say, it's become less stigmatized, particularly since 2017. And I've got very interested in it. I think social media, as it has with so many things, has really opened up the access to alternative histories, if you like. And so it's much easier now to link up with people who are interested in that subject. And it's a crazy subject in many ways that attracts crazy people, and there's a lot of, as they say, information, misinformation, disinformation. But I guess releasing that single, I just it was a song. When I write songs, they come out of somewhere inside of me. I don't sit down and think I'm going to write a song about this and mechanically do it. This song just sort of came out, and I just wanted to, as it were, mark the fact that we were in this new era, really. Since 2017, everything has changed. So it's like for us, we look out the window and it seems like everything's the same, the cars, the people, but actually everything's changed. And it's not just UFOs, it's the way we communicate, it's the pandemic, it's the war in Ukraine, and now this ghastly stuff in Gaza. It's like things change a lot, and we're in a sort of different world. And I just wanted to mark that, as it were.
Well, it's funny. Like every time I go into TikTok, I for whatever reason I must have gone into some rabbit hole about it. It's like I all I see is like videos about food and about UFOs, and I don't know
Yeah,
why that is,
yeah,
but it is interesting how
yeah.
you're right. The stigmatization
Hmm.
is certainly not what it used to be, and science is beginning to bear that out and admit this is stuff that we have known about for forever.
Well, there's a guy called Avi Loeb, isn't it? I forget who he works for, but what, like Stanford or one of the big research centers,
Yeah.
And he's very open about kind of, finding some stuff on an archaeological dig. I think these little spherical things of a metal that it wasn't clear what it was, So he was doing analysis on it, and when asked whether it could be extraterrestrial, he was kind of like, yeah, it could, and everyone goes like, oh my God. He's just being open, though. Do you know what I mean? It's like it could, or it might not be. It might just be completely explicable. But what's interesting, is that someone in a kind of reputable position is willing to toy with those ideas. And what's also interesting is how the military kind of reacts to this more open thing, because there's a sense in the UFO community, I think, that they are definitely trying to keep the gate shut, and there's a whole bunch of other people who are trying to get people who've actually had first-hand experiences to step forward and talk about what they experienced.
So, like I said, I go back a bit with Wang Chung. In fact, I even pulled out my old vinyl. I got the
Oh, yeah.
Points of a Curve here, and that's like one of those records when it came out. I loved it at the time, and it's funny because I've also heard the first Wang Chung album back when,
Okay.
and it's a huge leap between that version of the band and this record, and it was obviously, I don't know if it was because of the fact that you signed with Geffen, or was just a perfect storm? Were you just getting your legs
Mhm.
musically? But Dance Hall Days becomes your first commercial success,
Mm.
and that song had been around for a while. What happened that there was such a big leap between those two records?
Mm. It's a good question. I think with the Huang Chung album, it was I remember there are songs on it like Tina Na and Straight from My Heart, Rising in the East, where we were sort of playing with quite complex harmonies and stuff. And Rising in the East is quite proggy, really, doing it at a time when prog was like absolutely out of the question. So we were sort of experimenting with different things. And I see that you know, Tina and I was released as a single, but didn't chart and didn't really do anything because it's quite complicated and the title's weird and the band name's weird enough anyway, you know. And I think Dance All Days, in a sense, was me distilling the things that worked about Tina and I and kind of adding something else to it that made it just more accessible, you know. And again, I wasn't doing that in a conscious way, but I think, you know, in the music business, that you get one shot,
Yeah.
basically, you know. And if you don't get it, it's all over, really, you know. And I think there was that sense, you know, that we had that Wang Chung album. It did okay, but it wasn't good enough. We had to hit a higher level, you know. We did that with the song Dance All Days, and at that time we met a new manager, and he sort of said, "Look, what you guys are doing, the English music business just doesn't get it, you know, but the Americans do, you know." And so he got us out of the Arista deal and got us signed to Geffen Records, which was a really smart move.
Yeah.
So that was important. And I think it was also working with Chris Hues and Ross Cullum, you know, who had previously just worked with Tears for Fears on The Hurting, you know. And Chris is a very meticulous producer and a massive Beatles fan as well. And I think that underlying Beatles thing is on Points on the Curve. You know, we recorded it at Abbey Road Studio 2, where the Beatles made all their albums. And it's not exactly an homage to the Beatles, but it's got lots of Beatles influences, like on Talk It Out and I can't remember the other tracks, but there's various little times when we were deliberately referencing Beatle things, you know. And yeah, there's lots of stories around that, actually. So yeah,
You mentioned the good idea it was to get out of that Arista contract and to sign with Geffen. You
yeah,
guys were the second, if I'm not mistaken, the second British band to sign with Geffen after
yeah,
Asia. I mean, and at that point, all of a sudden, Geffen starts really exploding internationally,
yeah,
and certainly was doing pretty well in this country. But you couldn't have asked for better timing than to get into the Geffen, you know,
yeah,
umbrella like at that
yeah.
very moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were so lucky with that. You know, they were very dedicated to us. They gave us a lot of freedom and latitude to do what we wanted to do. You know, they were absolutely that kind of thing where it's like, let the artists be the artists and then let us market it, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah,
And that was just incredible, really, you know. And that they spent money when they needed to. And of course, the other thing, MTV was just coming up, and we were fortunate to have music, I suppose, that lent itself well to visual interpretation. You know, it's got a slightly kind of trippy cinematic feel to some of the music, you know. And so, you know, MTV again was an incredible marketing tool, you know, as well as a sort of very important cultural phenomena in its own right.
and now look at it.
Yes.
And now look what it's become. For all
Yeah.
the people who are complaining that MTV was terrible before, now take a look. You
It's a
guys,
long time since I've looked at it.
you guys did the soundtrack to Live and Die in L.A., which is a great movie, and it's a really, really good you know, soundtrack. But the question I had about it, because you know, back in the '80s, and I don't remember if people really, you know, understood this, is that movie soundtracks were kind of like a collection of singles and B-sides, and not necessarily something that an entire band would get to do the
Yeah.
entire soundtrack. But that was different from you guys. I know you like contributed a song to like the Breakfast Club
Yeah.
soundtrack, but it was very different when you guys did Live and Die in LA. How did that happen that you guys got to do the entire album and release it as your own?
Well, we were contacted directly by Bill Friedkin, who was the director of To Live and Die in LA and had previously directed The Exorcist and The French Connection. So, you know, proper Hollywood director, you know. But Billy was basically, To Live and Die in LA was his movie. He was producing it as well as directing it. So he was the guy, basically, you know. I found subsequently working or trying to work in Hollywood, you know, you would deal with the music people, but they were different from the, you know, the editing people and the storyline people, and you know, so you never really knew what was going on, and music was something that was like pretty, you know, at the end of the line, and you know, maybe we'll get this guy to do it, or you know, very whimsical, you know. Whereas working with Billy, he was very, you know, he wanted Wang Chung to do the soundtrack because he loved a track on Points on the Curve, a track called Wait. And he just basically phoned us up directly. I remember having a conversation with him. I was in London, he was in LA, you know, and he explained about working on this movie, that he was using Wait as a temp track. In
Hmm.
other words, that track was running while he would watch the daily rushes, you know. And he said, that's the atmosphere I want. So can you and your band, Jack, go in the studio and record me an hour's worth of music just like that? I don't want any songs. I just want the music. So I just said, yeah, you can do that, thinking, oh God, what are we going to do? But that was exactly what we needed at that time, because we were struggling with coming up with a sequel to Points on the Curve. I think Nick and I were both a bit, sick of trying to write 3-minute pop songs and choruses and that were all of that stuff you have to do. So the opportunity to write some longer form tracks and having like an amazing director kind of, using the music was great. Geffen at first were very against us doing it because they were kind of like, look, you guys have got to come up with a top 40 hit, and this is just going to take you, use up your creative energy and stuff. But on the contrary, do you know what I mean? It became they slightly grudgingly to begin with, but in the end got into it. And again, a mark of respect for Geffen that they shifted the goalposts that they were looking at and to encompass what we wanted to do. And by that time, I'd come up with "To Live and Die in L.A." The song that
Which is
we
great.
really did,
Which is great.
And, yeah. So it became well, I think one of our most successful albums in a way. It's got the 4 songs on one side and then the instrumental stuff on the other, on side B, and that to me was like echoing David Bowie's "Low" and "Hero," where he had a side A was 6 songs and side B was all his noodling with Brian Eno. So I sort of really loved all that. And yeah, that album came out. It wasn't a massive top. Well, it wasn't a top 40 hit at all. "To Live and Die in LA" kind of did okay at AOR radio or something. But essentially after that, it was a kind of like, okay, you've had your fun. Now you've got to get this fucking hit song together.
Well, and the following year you did that when you came out with "Everybody Have Fun Tonight." It was such a behemoth of a hit in
Yes.
this country.
Yeah.
I think it topped out at number 2.
Yeah.
I understand when I've talked to other people about you when they have like a big giant hit. It's kind of like a blessing and a curse at the same time. On one hand, I mean, you're thrilled to have the success and the notoriety, and you're doing the videos that put people into into,
Yep.
into epileptic seizures or whatever it may be. But it's a massive success, and on the other hand, everybody wants you to recreate that success another time, which is virtually impossible to do. But that song, I mean, it's a signature, and again, it's a part of the American cultures to hear that song. I mean, tell me about how you feel about that song. "Everybody Have Fun Tonight."
At the time, I think Nick and I used to sort of meet up at his flat in London, and he'd play me ideas, and I play him ideas. And I remember him playing me this "Everybody have fun tonight" kind of idea, and I was like, "Oh, I like that," and he's like, "Really? I thought you'd hate that idea," because most of his ideas I go like, "No," But I could sort of hear that song immediately, and we did a demo of it, which is a sort of very mid-tempo kind of ballad. Yes, yeah, it was sort of ballady, really, a bit like "Hey Jude," which is a song that I've been obsessed with all my life, well, since I heard it, and we played it, it sort of came up to people started loving it. They got the "Everybody Have Fun Tonight," and there was an ad lib line, which I just put in of "Everybody Wang Chung tonight," which I thought I'd probably change that, to something else. And then we started working with Peter Wolf, who was producing it at that time. And Peter had done "We Built This City on Rock and Roll" before that, so he was on a wave of massive hits, and he was kind of like, okay, we've got to move up the tempo of this song, make it a sort of proper dance record, and we've got that line, "Everybody have fun tonight, everybody Wang Chung tonight," that's the chorus. And I was like, no, we're going to get something better than that. He's like, no, that's the chorus. It's amazing. So I guess I felt like slightly dragged along, rather like kind of, no, not that. And then the massive success, as you say, sort of blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
But as the years have gone by, I've liked the track much more, because it is quite a sort of a song that we effectively wrote in the studio, rearranging the bones that I put together in the first place with Nick. And it's got a kind of energy to it. And we were working with Saida Garrett on it, on the vocals, and then Saida wrote "Man in the Mirror" for Michael Jackson, and she was just great to have around in the studio. She was a friend of Peter's, and we recorded a lot of it in LA. It was it was great, and then these days I look back at it with much more affection. And when we play it live, of course, people just go nuts.
Of course they do. So I know I don't have you for a whole lot of time here. I know that this tour also coincides with a best of album, Clear Night, Dark Matter. Your last
That's it.
album was in 2018, and Orchestrography, is that how you pronounce it?
That's it.
I
Yeah,
did it
nobody could
really.
do
God, I was obsessing for 4 days. I wasn't going to screw that up. But it's kind of like a best of album, but it was recorded with a Prague Philharmonic. I know that you
it.
guys are planning like actual shows with the symphonies, down the
Yeah.
road. Tell me about that experience. It had to be a pretty extraordinary experience to do that.
It was, yeah. Initially, this uh, company approached us, and they specialize in doing that sort of thing. The guy's a big 80s fan, has got some money, clearly. And, initially I think he just wanted to do Everybody Have Fun Tonight, Dance for Days and something else. But we persuaded him that it would make an amazing, whole album, and that if we did some of the deeper cuts like Space Junk, there's a track called Overwhelming Feeling that's on
Mm,
Taser Up, that I always thought was a pretty good ballad, but we hadn't really done it justice on Taser Up,
yeah.
and we did that one, and that's I think one of the most successful tracks on Orchestrography. So it was great, I mean, we're used to working on an album for months at a time, and really that was, although the arrangement process took quite a long time, and that was just bouncing sort of computer files back and forth. The actual recording of the orchestra, we did it all in a day, because essentially you put the music in front of these guys and they play it, done. You know? But it was exciting. We went over to Prague and hung out there, and I stayed a few extra days, and I'm a huge fan of classical music, as everybody knows. And so I went and saw them play some classical stuff, and yeah, had a really great time there, actually.
Now, I've read that you and Nick are considering or already in the process of writing new music. Do you see that
Mhm.
as maybe becoming a full album, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, certainly Nick has got a bunch of songs. I've been releasing solo albums recently. I did one in 2020 and another in 2021. And I've got another one more or less complete that I hope to release early 25, actually.
Mm,
So I guess, you sort of think, well, what is a Wang Chung record? What the stuff I'm writing tends to be more in a sort of proggy, jazzy direction.
hmm
Uh, and I guess I sort of think putting it in the Wang Chung arena means, a lot of people start picking at it and, doing stuff. And I sort of think, nah, this stuff I like how it is. So, and I know Nick wants to sort of do some of his own stuff as well. So whether we'll get to doing an actual Wang Chung album, I think a lot of that will depend on, I think the next thing, is Clear Like Dark Matter, which is a sort of greatest hits, but also some deep cuts from back catalogue, stuff that was never released at the time, some demos, a couple of songs that were never released at the time. And then we want to release the 6 studio albums in kind of like definitive editions, on vinyl and CD, with all of the stuff that was written at the time that didn't come out in different mixes and so on. I think once we got all that out of the way, that may induce us to get in the studio and sort of tackle a Wang Chung thing. But I know Tears for Fears have done that recently very successfully, and we'd want to be doing something at a pretty high level.
Sure.
So it needs to be done with wit and style.
Well, Jack, I'm thrilled I was finally get to set the record straight with the Ice Cubes on in that Milwaukee show back in the '80s. But but it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Like I said, I've admired Wang Chung for many many years, and I've loved your music for now 40 years. So thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
The Abducted by the '80s tour with Wang Chung, Naked Eyes, and Emotion, and Men Without Hats is coming to Hampton Beach, New Hampshire on June 16th. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to subscribe to it, like it, review it, share it with everyone you know. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram of Chicopee, and thanks to you for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.